Hello, everyone. Today I'm with best-selling author John Lee, and John is the author of Flying Boy and a range of books. So we're going to talk about some of your life and work today, John. So welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You getting up so early in the morning, and it's late evening here in North Carolina. So I very much appreciate it.
John, I was just saying to you just before we started that I was reading over the Flying Boy yesterday, and I was thinking, well, firstly, to go back one step, I remember Glenn Slater saying about James Hillman that he lifts up rocks and shows you the strange creatures underneath. And I was thinking, when I was rereading The Flying Boy, it's like you have that ability to lift up rocks, but it's the deep emotional life, the deep feeling life, the all of the things that the poor flying, those with the flying tendencies maybe try to keep away from a little,
Mhm.
and the ability to articulate a lot of that.
Mm. Thank you. Well, like I was saying, it came out of necessity. It
Mm.
came out of urgency. It came out of crisis. It came out of pain because I couldn't feel anything, and and that caused tremendous pain in my life and in others. And that book is almost 40 years old now, and it's still out there. And men will say to me, John, I read The Flying Boy, and a lot of what you said was my story.
Mm.
The absent father, the alcoholic father, the inability to commit to a relationship or to a career. Um, it was so strange that I did the book, and that it's still out there. But it really came from what I was saying before. The women that was with up to the Flying Boy book, which I wrote at 33, and I'm 73 now. I just can't believe it. It's just gone that fast.
Yeah.
Women would say to me, John, you're always in your head. You're always in your head. And when they'd say that, I was just perplexed. I didn't know where else I was supposed to be. you know,
Mm.
they'd say things like, "Can you just open your heart?" or "Can you let me in?" And I just get more and more frustrated because I didn't know. And then, when the woman in the Flying Boy left, it was like, man, I've got to do something. I've got to change this narrative big time.
But I
So,
think one thing, I mean, just to add a little more, is that I don't know. There's like I use jargon. I can't help it sometimes, psychological jargon. We're full
mhm,
of it, aren't we? But it's kind
mhm,
of like, I appreciate the way to me, the way you're writing, it's the psychology as life and experience and the experience of life. And that takes a lot of emotional honesty to write that way. Like and I see that as kind of the initiation, if you
mhm,
want to put it that way, that it's kind
mhm,
of like that deepening is into that kind of
mhm,
thing of writing about your experience, your
mhm.
relationships, your life, and living in that.
Well, I mean, it really was the case. I would write 2 or 3 pages and I'd break down and just sob and sob and sob. And then I'd write two or three, 4 or 5 more pages and sob and sob and sob. And that the letting go of that emotion while I was writing, uh, I think still comes through in the book. That's why, I'm happy to say, honored to say, some people have said, John, I could read 4 pages and I'd have to put it down. It was just too much because I was sobbing, you know.
Mm.
So I'm appreciative of that book and the support that it's been given, and the people it's touched, and um, you know, so that's kind of where the career began, was with that.
So, John, all after the 40 years since the Flying Boy, what can you tell us about the puella, Flying Boy? What's your take on it now?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that Robert Bly pointed out, and I agreed with him about this, was we never want to demonize the puer or puella, and we never want to get rid of it as if it was something that needed to be put away somewhere, you know. But to draw the positive elements, most puers are highly creative, highly intelligent, and highly sensitive. And the sensitivity of a puer is what makes him fly. That you know, there's a wonderful book, or actually a series of books, and I'll think of her name in just a minute. It's called The Highly Sensitive Person. Do you know that material?
I don't know. I haven't come
Oh, it's
across it.
brilliant stuff. It's brilliant stuff. And I'll think of the author's name in just a minute. But she talks about how 20% of all mammals, this is deep embedded in research now, are what's called highly sensitive. So, there's of the dogs, 20% of dogs would fall under this highly sensitive, 20% of horses, 20% of all mammals. And so, God, I can't say, I'll think of her name before we get too far. But when I read that, what I realized was that flying boys, puers, puellas, have a sensitivity to life, and it gets, especially in boys, it gets buried early on, because you can't be or at least in my generation, you couldn't be a sensitive boy and not get the shit beat out of you, so you have to get tough. And sadly, the dads of my generation knew that, and they consciously or unconsciously tried to toughen us up. And they did, to an exaggerated degree in my case, So puers are eternal boys, but I saw Robert Bly move out of the puer archetype and more to what Robert Moore called king, warrior, magician, and lover archetypes, and saw him in his latter years enter the archetypal energy of the king. And puers can't really attain that, too easily. Puers can stay lovers using Robert Moore's 4 quadrants. They can even stay warriors, and they certainly can stay magicians. But to be a king, you've got to have negotiated the positive elements of the puer and let go pretty much of all of the destructive elements of the puer.
So it seems to me, just from reading Robert Bly, from reading some of your work, that, the mother and father figure in this quite strongly, don't they? And a lot of things seem to be tied up, that sometimes if the father had that issue with alcohol and there's that strong, so there can be a positive mother complex, or there can be a strong bond towards mother. So how does one A, recognize all of that, and B, work through that over time? What would
Well,
you say?
the dynamic for most men of my generation, and I reckon still generations that are coming, but certainly from mine and Robert's generations, the father's absent for one reason or another. Now, in my case, alcohol, and work addiction. Dad was gone all the time. Now, the absent father, the German psychiatrist Alexander Mitscherlich said, when the father is absent, a hole develops in the son, and in that hole, demons rush in. Alcohol, pornography, drugs, the whole thing, religion. So most of the men of my generation and yours was raised by mom, and if the mother loves and is married to a man who's an addict or abuser, as my dad was, then she and women will develop a negative feelings about the masculine, about men. So, I remember my mom telling me, I never want you to be like your dad or your uncles. See, so that right there is just an infusion of the puer. See, we one of the things that killed me. Mom needed a hero, and I stepped in as the eldest to be that, and became a surrogate husband, a surrogate counselor, a surrogate priest, a surrogate doctor, and so that dynamic then creates a whole mess all of its own. So the absent father, the too much mother, too much entanglement with the mother, too much psychosexual energy coming from the mother who's not getting what she needs from her husband or a man. So no wonder I flew. No wonder I flew.
And in that story that Robert Bly talks about, he talks about stealing the key from under the mother's pillow. I always remember those words.
Iron John.
Iron John. But what does it mean? What does it mean to steal the key back from under the mother's pillow? Because I can relate in the sense of perhaps in my mother's, like, there's something great about the positive love from the mother. You think you're a little bit magical or special or whatever, I think, as you've mentioned, but it's kind of like it has that other side, doesn't it? It has that kind of dark side. And then how does one steal the key back to get one's life to one's own?
Well, first of all, one has to have a mentor or a therapist or a coach or somebody to tell the boy where the key is. Because left to our own devices as young men, there'd be no way we would know where. First of all, we didn't know that there was a key. Second of all, if we did know there was a key to our masculinity and to healthy masculine behavior, then we didn't know where it was. So somebody has to tell us. And in my case, of course, that was Robert Bly with the story of Iron John. When I read it back in the 80s when it came out, I went, oh my God, of course. But what does it entail? Basically, in the language that I use, you got to let your mother go. And most, especially here in the Deep South, there's this thing where mom is always on a pedestal and you're there to protect mom at all costs. You're not supposed to say anything negative or bad. You can say all the bad things you want about your alcoholic dad, but you're not supposed to talk about your mother. So, to say mom, which is what I did. I was 36 or 37. I said, Mom, I got to stop this emotional entanglement with you, because it's impacting my relationship with women. And so I'm going to say that I'm taking a huge break from our relationship, and that when we come back together, whenever that is, I need it to be adult to adult. So the phrase that I was given years ago was, I had to stop sonning my mother, stop acting like a son, talking like a son, thinking like a son, and wanting her to be the mother and be motherly and comforting. One of my most embarrassing facts of life is when I would break up with everybody from my high school sweetheart to the woman in the flying boy, I'd call my mother. I didn't go to a man or a
And she
mentor.
might say, well, she might say, and don't worry, John, because none of them will be able to cook as good as me anyway.
Or love you like I do, you know? Yeah, absolutely. And you're just too good for her. Huh? You'll be glad someday that y'all broke up. I can't believe I'd call my mother.
Yeah.
Anyway, so stopping sonning the mother and the father is a one way of talking about getting the key out from under your mother's pillow. But you got, of course, you know the story so well. You got to take that key and unlock the wild man that's in the cage and hop on his shoulders and go on an immense journey. And see, mom didn't want wildness.
No.
She wanted a special. She wanted golden. She wanted a preacher, but she didn't wild.
Civilized and
Civilized.
aesthetically pleasing in the world.
Exactly.
Stylish.
Good boy. She wants a good boy, not a wild man. And a lot of women today, they want a good boy, but then when they get one, then they long for the wildness. And most men have not gone into their mother's bedroom at night while she's asleep, as in the story says, and got that key out from under her pillow and unlocked. And so a lot of women will say, yeah, he's sweet and good, but there's not very much ecstasy or passion or spontaneity, And again, partly he's in his head. Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes I think, John, I think that's an important distinction with the wild, because when people hear the wild man, they think, what do they think? They think out of control man. That's what sometimes people say about the men's retreats at that time. They ran around in the bush, banging drums. God knows, were they wearing anything at the time? It's kind of like, but somehow it seems to me that what we're talking about is more the natural man in a way, like and this movement from the head to the heart and the body is part of that naturalization process.
Well, and a Dionysian man as opposed to an Apollonian. Yeah, the Apollo is the the god of the head, and Dionysus is the god of the body and sexuality, and passion and stuff. But what happened in the 80s is, it was they. I look back at it and I cringe a little bit sometimes at what we were doing and stuff, but we'd been cooped up in that cage for so long, being good boys, that we sort of went to the far extreme of that for a while. But what really made it worse was the media got a hold of it and turned it into a caricature thing and a comedy thing. I'll never forget Robert Bly and I and Robert Moore were doing a men's weekend in Michigan, and we were staying at a bed and breakfast, and we had finished up a Sunday, and we were having breakfast, and there was a couple at a table within earshot, and the local newspaper had covered the weekend, sent a reporter to, see what was going on, cameras and stuff, photographs. And we heard the guy say, I was thinking about doing one of these men's things, but now after reading this, there's no way in hell I'm going to do one.
Yeah.
And I thought, there it is. The media just told that guy, no, don't do this. Too crazy, too wild, So,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah. But, it stayed alive. People would say in the 2000s, so what happened to the men's thing? And I go, it scaled down, but then multiplied like loaves and fishes, so to speak. You say, what do you mean? I'd say, well, in every big city in the United States, you'll find men's groups being run. And every month, somewhere, you'll see 20 guys out in Colorado doing a weekend with myth and drumming. Not 200 guys, 20 guys, 10 guys.
Yeah.
And that's happened all over. It's happened in your country. The greatest format that has been able to survive and continue and thrive is what was originally called the New Warriors, and then later named the Mankind Project. And they've been doing weekend trainings all over this country, your country, many countries in Europe, and have run thousands and thousands of men over the 40 years through that, and some others. Yeah.
I remember I'm thinking, I'd like to say 27, 28, reading Iron John for the first time or whatever, and the resonance of it. And then looking back, like I remember hearing in older cultures, this is obvious in one way, isn't it? The men were initiated by the men and the women were often initiated by the women.
Mm-hmm.
And that whilst that might seem unusual to some people, that it seems that a lot of the learning for me came from men that were going through a process that one could relate to.
Yeah. The lack of meaningful ritual and ceremony has done a devastation to not only masculinity, but femininity and the uniting of the sexes. Most men, because of lack of ritual and ceremony, wake up each day going, have I become a man yet? Well, that didn't happen. That question was never asked in indigenous cultures. Never needed to be asked, because 12, 13, 14, was it right in that period there, you got the ritual, you got the ceremony, which then demanded that you take on male, masculine, adult responsibilities in the tribe. And this was true in your country and my country, especially 100 years ago. It was not unusual for a 17-year-old to marry and have kids. In the South, in my era, even in Texas, on the legal books, they still have the age of 13 for a woman to be legally wed. And one of my aunts was married at 16. There was this sense that there was that somehow or another boys became men in some ways sooner, and girls became women. And now the average age for marriage in this country, I think, is something like 32 or something. So
John, when I was very young, I went out with my father. We were in the country in Western Australia, and I would have been maybe 6 or 7. And I always remember going to this farm, and there was a husband and a wife. But the husband was calling his wife mum. He kept on calling her mum. He
Yeah.
said, maybe mum, you could get Gordon and John a cup of tea or whatever. And that kind of freaked me out that even as a 6 or 7-year-old,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
knew
yeah.
there was something terribly wrong with that. So it's kind of like uh, now that we don't have the proper rituals, right, or initiation ceremonies, it seems to me that
Mhm.
sometimes that in those kind of local settings that someone did get married, but the transfer didn't really happen quite
Yeah,
properly. Or
yeah, I think that's probably right. I think I know in here again in the South,
mm,
my mom, uh, my mom calls dad, and
mm,
he calls her mom. Go ask your
mm.
mom. Go ask your dad. Dad, what do you want for dinner? Mom, whatever you're going to cook is fine. I just go, I'm out of here. It's just too weird, you know. But it happens a lot. I was on a plane not long ago, and a young 30-year-old in the 30s with two kids were getting settled on the plane close to me, and uh, and she says, "So, Daddy, you want to sit over here with Susie?" No, Mama, you stay with Susie. I'll stay with little Bobby or whatever it was. And I thought, here we go. And that wasn't 50 years ago. That was a year ago or two, you know.
Mm.
So anyway,
I
what else
mean,
you want to talk about?
I want to talk about how that's led to. I think you know the range of your work is also interesting. Like how many books have you written now, John?
I've had 24 published so far, I think, maybe 25. I've sort of lost count. I think I'm
Like,
working on my 25th. Yeah.
I think like how did it lead to some of your other work, like the half-lived life, the odd one out? Can you tell us how one led to another in a way?
Well, it really, you know, in retrospect, I can see the connecting dots, you know.
Mm, mm,
But what I will say, because it's true, is every one of my books came out of, oh my God, I got this issue. I've got this character defect. I've got this neuroses. I've got this problem I need to work on. And so um, it just kind of like most people hadn't seen this book to the degree the first one, but in the second book, Flying Boy Book Two, The Journey Continues.
mm,
I that was started by two things. One or three things. One, I realized that the woman I was with during that time was more like my father, whereas in the first book, Laurel was more like my mother. So here I was, being drawn into a relationship with somebody that had lots of my absentee father behavior and emotional distant behavior, and then consequently, because of the first book, I finally realized I was an adult child and an alcoholic, and so I go into recovery and start going to adult children of alcoholics, and then later Codependence Anonymous, and that's what's in that book. And so I'm researching and reading and going to meetings and talking to people and trying to work out my own thing, you know. And then, my next big book was at my father's wedding, where now I'm totally invested in the men's work. Why? Because I need to do men's work, you know. And then my next book is on anger. Why? Because I'm an angry son of a bitch and I got to deal with it. I got to figure. So research, read every book on anger, go to a particular therapist who specializes in it. And so each book is generated out of my own mess and stuff, and then I realize, I regress. Well, okay, I'm regressing. One minute I'm a 40-year-old adult, and the next minute somebody looks at me wrong, and I'm 4 years old or
Yeah.
12. So I got to deal with this. So I got to figure this. So each book, and my ex-wife 28 years ago, every book that I did, I would say, this is it. This is the end. I don't have
But
any books
but
left.
but you're a prodigious writer, and I always find that, like, somewhere towards the end of this, I'd like to just ask you a little bit about writing too, because
Okay.
it's it's a mysterious thing and a wonderful thing, as well. But can we just unpack a few of these things that you've said up to now? Because, for
Yeah.
example, alcohol, like, I can relate to that. My father was an alcoholic, I would say, but I would have, for a long time in my life, I wouldn't have said anything much about that. I
Yeah,
would
I
have
did
found,
not. I used the definition that my dad did until my mid 30s. They'd say, don't you think your dad's an alcoholic? And I go, no. And they go, why? And I give the same thing that he would say when people would chastise him about it. He'd say, I've never missed a day's work, and I've never fallen down in the gutter. And
mm,
and back growing up,
mm,
that seemed reasonable to me. And so even when I was drinking hard in my
mm.
20s and 30s, and people said, John, you may have a problem with alcohol, don't think. I go, I've never missed a day's work. I've never fallen in the gutter. Yeah.
To me, it's one of the most powerful drugs, like, that you can ever take. But the thing is, that's what I'd like to ask you, is how does it affect a person to have an alcoholic parent? What it seems to me, there's many insidious things that happen there, in terms
Yeah.
of they go deep, and
Yeah.
perhaps it's
Yeah.
hard to recognize the way they're going into the soul, something like that.
Well, here's one way I think about it. You take everything an alcoholic parent tells
Mm.
you about life, about love, about money, about God, and then you do 180 degrees of that, and you go, oh my God, they were 180 degrees wrong. So, like, see, your thinking as an alcoholic or an addict, your thinking is just messed up. We have we don't say a lot of the sayings that we have in the South, but used to, we would say something like, well, old Jim Brown, he's a sober-minded man. Now, what that meant was his behavior and what was coming out of his mouth was sober, was well thought out. So my mom was raised by an alcoholic, for instance. So in my 40s, I remember saying to my mom, I said, Mom, you remember telling me you could never trust anybody? And she said, Oh, honey, I never said that. I said, Yeah, you always said never trust anybody. Eventually, everybody will let you down. And she said, Well, that's right. I said, No, it isn't right. That to me is the quintessential alcoholic testimony to not being sober minded. I said, Mom, no, the truth is some people you can trust and some you can't. Some will let you down and some won't. Um, Stupid thing. The alcoholic father who says, big boys don't cry. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. So much of what you're taught in an alcoholic home is just the opposite of what is true.
And
That's why it's so insidious. Yeah.
did you try to become the opposite as well? Was that part of the gig?
Well, no, I mean, the weird part about that is that if you grow up in an alcoholic home, you think that the reality that you're encountering is the only reality. And again, in my generation, nobody talked about this stuff. You don't go to your priest or your minister and say, "Hey, my dad's an alcoholic," or "My dad beats me," which my dad. You don't tell people that. So I mean, up until even to some degree today, a son might say, "I'm thinking about going to therapy, Dad," and Dad might say, "What? Are you crazy? Are you insane? Is that why you go?" I mean, it's still
because it was a stoic generation too, wasn't it? It was that you just got on with it. They'd been to the Second World War, or in my case, and if you got through that, you kind of got on with things, and you got on with the material things too. Like
that's right.
Making a
Main
buck.
thing is you don't talk about family secrets, and you don't talk about the past.
But there's some shame in there somehow tied up. Like I remember, I think it was John Bradshaw, didn't he, wrote that book? What was it? The Shame That
Healing the Shame That Binds.
Healing the Shame That Binds. But somehow I can see the connection between the alcohol and that little bit the shame of the child.
Yeah, see, you don't, you grow up in an alcoholic home, you don't want anybody to know the true story about what you're enduring and living with, and also, you mix in my case that with poverty, lack of education, alcoholism. Now you got a mess that you got to be, and that your mother's getting beaten and you're getting beaten. I mean, good Lord, John Bradshaw, talk to me, because I'm full of shame. Full of shame. Yeah.
So then the question is psychology. You know what? Oh, well, I don't know how this exactly relates, but it seems to me that Robert Bly was influenced by Marie Louise von Franz, and I admire her, and I admire her intelligence very strongly. But I've sometimes said I wouldn't like to get in a street fight with Marie Louise because she's a tough cookie, but smart as anything. And then James Hillman seemed to me a little bit different in the sense of how he thought about the flying boy, his approach towards psychology. So, what's your take on all of that? There's a slightly different way of treating all of this, isn't there, somewhere?
Well, see, James Hillman, Marie von Franz, there's all these wonderful Jungians, Marion Woodman, Linda Leonard, Jean Shimoda Boland. All of them have their own take. All of them are psychologists, or I'm not a psychologist. I dabble in psychology, but I'm a generalist. What used to be known in academia as a generalist. And that it doesn't happen much anymore at the university level. But my degrees was in religion and literature and sociology. But so that's the combination of my academic background. But mostly, I'm just a blue collar Southern Appalachian guy with a little bit of education and a whole lot of luck, to get to talk about these things. But I have to talk about them at the honest level that I find myself, which is more pedestrian, which is more man of the street, man from a farm. My grandparents, all of them were farmers up here in Appalachia. like Robert's was. Robert is light years ahead of me in intelligence and writing and everything, but he's not an academic. He had no training in psychology. He comes from the farm, you know, and so when I've been fortunate enough to not only read most of the Jungians that I just taught, Robert Johnson, but I got to teach with them, and I still marvel at how that happened. You know, I don't understand that at all, because they're clinical psychologists, academic, Jungian depth psychology, and I'm not. Uh, you know, I wanted to be, but I don't have that kind of brain. You know, I read Marie von Franz or Marion Woodman or James Hillman, and with my rural education, attention deficit disorder, and dyslexia, I have to read them again and again and again, and then still forget most of it. You know. So I was lucky, you know, the Jungian, the two Jungians that I read the most and admire the most is James Hollis and Robert Johnson. Their works speak to me. And then, do you know Linda Leonard's book, old book, Wounded Healing the Wounded Woman? That was a major influence in me writing The Flying Boy, Healing the Wounded Man. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why Hollis and why Robert Johnson? Why would you say?
Well, they just Hollis and Robert Johnson are supreme intellects, but the way they're writing is just it's approachable to me in ways that James Hillman and the others. I mean, I've read them, but like for instance, Robert Johnson's he's written. He's passed now, but he's written 15, 20 books, and I reread his books. You know, like his little book, He, She, and We. I've read each of those 4 or 5 times, and James Hollis's books, Under Saturn's Shadow. You know, I just keep going back to it. Working with the mother complex stuff, but you know, I told you the story. It's the story of a naive, sort of a vain, arrogant young man story. But in my 20s and early 30s, I was reading so much Jung, especially, read a dozen or more of his books, and then these people that I'm talking about, and so I really wanted to be the Southern Carl Jung. You know, and that was hindering me, to say the least, because I was trying to be somebody that I couldn't be. And then there's,
I think it ties up with the topic of writing in a way too, because I remember reading in your book that, you know, you attempted when you first started with The Flying Boy, didn't you? You attempted to write for some time, which was connected maybe to that. And
I was trying to write my final dissertation for my doctorate. You know, the only thing I could see as a career was teaching at a university, and by this time, which was in the 80s, if you didn't have a PhD, you weren't going to be hired at a university. And so I was struggling. I did all my coursework, but then was struggling to write an academic dissertation that I am not qualified, or certainly wasn't then, to write. And yet I kept saying to my the chairman of my committee and stuff, if I don't get this dissertation done, I'm out of a job, you know. And
It's
So,
uncertain. But it seems to me that somehow there's I don't know, what is it, that in the formal, in the theoretical, there are some traps there somewhere too, isn't there? And it's kind of like, because ultimately psychology is about life and relationship. And,
mhm.
like, I don't know, I call it street humor. It's kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
uh, I think maybe that's what Hillman was trying to say when he said it's just psychology is not just about the consulting. It's kind of,
Mhm,
he's
mhm,
trying to sort of say that it's broader, wider,
mhm,
deeper.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's street smart wisdom, sort of, you know. Um, so, the thing was, I told you that this dream I had as I was trying to write The Flying Boy, that Carl Jung was in a casket in a funeral home, and the casket was open casket. And in the dream, I walk up to the casket and I kiss him on the forehead and I say goodbye. And when I woke up, I knew that trance Jungian trance that I was in had been broken, and I'd come out of the spell. And that's when I started writing The Flying Boy, going, for better or worse, this is what's in me and what needs to come out, and did. Um, and then, of course, like I said, probably to you or others, nobody wanted to publish it. It's like in the '80s, this thing of a memoir by somebody that wasn't famous for some reason, a politician or movie star. Memoirs didn't get published by somebody like me, um, you know. And so it was rejected, 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 rejected. And then we put some money together back in the '80s, self-published, threw them in the trunk, and started taking them around to what was independent bookstores before Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And, maybe the big publishers didn't want it, but people did, especially men and women. And
Did
then
it
I got
change? Did it change your life a lot, John?
oh my God. Oh, whew. I mean, one minute I'm making 18,000, 16,000 a year. And the next minute, you know, um, what town cars or town limos were picking me up and taking me to TV shows, flying me all around,
You spoke
and
to Oprah as well, didn't you, and all of that?
well, that yeah, she had me on 3 times, and
Did you
that
just go to Jeff? Did you just go to Jeff Bezos's wedding in Venice? Were you invited to that as well, or did you?
yeah. Now them days, I never got there, but yeah, this was '89, and
Yeah,
and she held up the book while I was on
yeah,
a show. She held up the book and said, "You people got to go read this." Now, everybody has to remember, though, this was not the Oprah that she became. She was just kind of starting, but she had enough power that the next week it sold 20,000 copies.
yeah.
And that got me on the publishers' uh, uh, top 10 best selling books. And then it just kept going. And then she had me on a couple more times with it. And I mean, I owe my career. I owe my career to her, John Bradshaw, Robert Bly, Bill Stott, um, uh, Dan John, just so many people. But Oprah, we wouldn't be sitting here if Oprah hadn't gotten hold of that book. Yeah.
And John, I mean, just you know, okay, we have the puer, the flying boy, but then we have the adult and the elder. Like you were saying to me when we were having a chat before, that you've been thinking about the elder. lately. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'd love to chat to you about that sometime. But
Well,
it's like the adult. What is the adult, and what is the elder? What would you be thinking about it at this time?
well, maybe I'll say a couple of words about it in preparation for another conversation, if you will.
Yeah, lovely.
It's getting a little late here. Um, eh, there's a bunch of factors going on, but the 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 demand or the desire for eldering, for mentoring, seems to be stronger than I've ever seen it in the 40 years. That more men are talking about it, more men are asking for it, more men are complaining about the lack of, and more men have turned to me and said, John, you're an elder now, and we're hungry for elders. And I go, I guess I am. I guess, yep, almost 74. I mean, and I've been doing this a long time. I guess I have a right to claim that. But if I'm going to claim it, I need to know what the hell I'm talking about. And so, just like I said earlier about all my books spinning out of where I am.
Mm.
And so, the last 2 or 3 years, I've been thinking and reading and researching about aging and being an elder. Now, if we go back a few years, we see a book called Growing Yourself Back Up, Understanding Emotional Regression. The theme of that book, the essence of that book, is how do I become an adult? How do I stay in my prefrontal cortex and in my adult brain? And why do I leave it? And why do I regress and think like a pimple-faced teenager? I got to learn how to be an adult. And so when I was researching that, I'm reading everything I can. What is it like to be an adult? What does an adult look like, talk like, think like? And so that had to be the preface to my work on elderhood and adulthood. But that was where it got started. And then, a confluence of things. Mostly so much of the elders, especially in men's work, but recovery work too, they've all died off. Robert
But
Moore's gone, Robert Bly's gone, Robert Johnson's gone, um, John Bradshaw's gone. So I'm sort of the last man standing. You know, so, and I don't know what that means exactly, except that I have quite a few men that, I work with 50, 55, 40, 45, youngest in their 30s, with elder hunger like I had in my 30s and 40s. But I got fed. I mean, Bradshaw and Bly both took me under their wing. Bly more so than Bradshaw, but still Bradshaw. I mean, Bradshaw was a major influence in getting the Flying Boy published with the publishing company that he was, with. So
such a big topic
that's a
in so
little,
many ways. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I'd love to go into that with you. And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of like it seems to me when you get older, like I might be just a little bit younger than you, not much, a
Mm-hmm.
few years, but it's there's that thing of in a society, in a commodified society, there's one kind of push that people are just sent off. They go to Florida or something like that. I don't know. I haven't
Right,
been to
right,
Florida,
right, right, right.
but
That's right.
uh, or old age homes or whatever. So it's
Uh,
kind of like there's a lot of people renegotiating their role, and there's pressure to be invisible or something like that. But
mm-hmm,
on,
mm-hmm.
on the contrary, if I think back to being a flying boy or whatever, is you're not that interested in the past. You're more interested in the future. And it's kind
Future.
of like, get out of the road, we're coming through. It's adolescent
Mm-hmm.
power. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
60s power, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Mm-hmm.
going on, the interest becomes in the ancestors, the past, the old stories, the wisdom or whatever. And it's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be exciting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, now then also, you throw in the whole mortality thing, you know. I'm facing the beginning of the winter of my life,
Mm.
you know. Um, so the here and now is important, but so is the past. William Faulkner, the great Southern writer, said the past isn't dead, it's not even the past.
Mm.
Um, that our past is infusing and infuriating us even in the present.
Mm.
Um, so maybe if you are kind enough to have me on again down the road, we'll go deeper into this. I've got quite a bit of material to say. One of the things that the 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 workshops that I'm doing and webinars that I'm doing now,
Yeah.
I'm calling the Odyssey of Aging, and using the Odyssey as a major tool to talk about moving from midlife to elderhood, moving from hero to elder.
Mm.
Uh, and so I'd like to talk a little bit more about that when we have time.
Well, thank you, John, and
Okay.
thanks for, yeah, thank you very
Oh,
much.
well,
Thanks.
thank you, John. What a stimulating conversation. Thank you so much for having me and taking the time to do this. And I certainly appreciate it. And when you get it done, I don't know how if you edit or whatever, let us know, and we're going to put it on our website so people can access it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you
All right,
very
sir.
much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, bud. Look forward